Welcome to our final week, week 8 of Philosophy 320, Bioethics. And for our final topic, we're going to talk about something interesting, something that I think is really cool and doesn't necessarily get enough attention. It's the ethics of blood plasma markets. You'll notice that for this week, I did not assign a reading. I assigned an episode from my podcast. Now, the reason I did that is because I interviewed a philosopher who specializes in working in this topic. He very much comes down on one side of things, as will I. However, I will try and give voice to the other side of the issue, and I understand why there are certain philosophers who simply disagree with us, but it's an unusual take on a very difficult issue. So without further ado, let's get started. So some people think like, look, there's just some things that should and shouldn't be sold. I'm trying to get my video window out of the way there so you can see the slide. Things that are morally permitted. Generally speaking, we think, hey, cars and trucks, right? You can buy a truck or a car at a car dealership or a truck dealership. Nothing wrong with that, morally speaking. Assuming you didn't steal it or wasn't a stolen item, something like that. Fancy coffee, right? I can walk into a Starbucks. I tend to like my coffee black, very simple. Not even cream and sugar. I just like to kick the main line that caffeine right into the veins. But a lot of people like the fancy coffees. They're, caramel frappuccino with extra whipped cream and yada, yada, yada. And we don't think, look, to the extent there was nothing wrong with how the coffee was acquired or it's not stolen or something, there's nothing particularly wrong about buying and selling fancy coffees. Amusement park pass. A friend of mine, I used to be very jealous of him growing up as a kid, had a yearly pass to Disneyland in Florida. I hated his guts, kind of, not really. I was really jealous when to go to them. And I bought that thing and got lots of fun going to amusement parks and nobody thinks, no, there's anything particularly wrong with that. Farm equipment, although I guess it's somewhere to cars and trucks, but you get the idea. Then there's things that are people consider to be morally wrong to buy and sell. Children would be an example. We think it's wrong to buy and sell children. This is not the same thing as paying adoption fees or paying for their clothes and food, education and healthcare and that sort of thing, but the actual buying and selling, the owning of children, just like the owning of human beings in general. Obviously, I stuck that in there because it's cartoonish. I don't think that's very controversial. At least I hope it's not, knock on wood. Stolen goods would be another one. So I'm going with the ones without the question marks first. We're on slide 2, by the way, for listening. Stolen goods. We think it's morally wrong to sell those. There may be some mitigating circumstances when people are desperate. Maybe they're hungry and they don't have much of a choice. Someone who's starving and steals a sandwich, you might think is a little firmer moral ground than someone who's stealing flat screen TVs and like breaking into people's houses just to make money because they're too lazy to get a job. You think, well, that's wrong. And there's questions of things like kidneys and lungs and blood plasma. Come to find out, these are actually quite controversial. Some people think that certain things just shouldn't be bought and sold. And among those things are children, stolen goods, and things like kidneys and blood plasma. So this is a very contentious view, which is why they're highlighted. And I'm giving you what I take to be one of the mainstream views. This is quite common among non-philosophers. If you ask people on the streets, you kind of get the response like it's kind of icky to sell kidneys or to sell blood plasma. There's maybe perverse incentives, yada, yada, yada. What's interesting about this is that we are facing we as a society, as a world, as a human species, are facing huge shortages in organs and blood plasma. Blood plasma in particular is hard to defend not buying and selling of it because it regenerates. Some people will argue, to go back to the last slide, some people argue, for example, that kidneys are a different animal altogether, so to speak, insofar as you only have 2 of them, and if you sell one, not only are you stuck without a backup kidney, but it's hard to reverse that, right? You can't change your mind, it doesn't regenerate. It is an irreversible decision with potentially dire implications. Maybe you sold out of desperation and you wish you hadn't, because now one kidney that you do have is bad, so now you need a kidney transplant, etc. I'm using kidneys as sort of a distinction case because blood plasma is not like that. Blood plasma regenerates pretty quick. It's the sort of thing your body makes, and it's the sort of thing that we are in desperate need of. There are tons of people who need it. It's a growing need. As the population of the world gets bigger, there are more and more people who need it, and a lot of countries have banned the sale of it, so there's huge shortages. So, given the health issues here listed on the slides, slide 3, you might think something like, hey, look, we're facing a blood plasma shortage. We have basically 3 options. Number 1, let the shortage persist and people will die. Lots of people will die. Who, with blood plasma, wouldn't have to die. That's option number 1. Option number 2, you could force people to give plasma. We could mandate that maybe if you get in trouble and instead of giving community service, you have to donate a certain amount of blood plasma, or as a form of like taxation, you have to give a little bit of blood plasma, sort of community service, sort of like voting or fighting in the army, something along those lines. Or a lottery system where you're randomly picked as a citizen, you have to donate a certain amount of blood plasma. I don't have to kill you, you'll be fine, but we're going to force you to do it. So that's 2. We could force donations of blood plasma. Or 3, we can pay for it. Now, you might say, other than paying for it and having a market for it, couldn't we just have people donate it out of the kindness of their heart? In which case I would refer you back to option number 1, people will die from shortages, because in many countries that is the current system. We expect people to donate blood plasma, merely out of the kindness of their heart. And apparently that's not cutting it because we have a blood plasma shortage. At least insofar as there's a bunch of countries who have banned the sale of blood plasma and hardly anybody there donates. So you've got shortages, status quo. We can have mandated or legally enforced donations, or we can have markets where we pay people money to buy or to sell their blood plasma. Blood plasma is essential for treatments of people with like severe traumas. Severe head traumas come to mind. Burn and shock patients, not all of them, but there's a subset of them that blood plasma is used to produce life-saving medicines and treatments. Clotting deficiencies. I have a relative who has the clotting deficiency. They need blood plasma. And luckily, we live in the United States where you can buy and sell it. It's one of the few countries where that's the case. So we are one of the world's suppliers of blood plasma, but most countries don't have that. Severe liver disease is another one. That is huge. A lot of people with severe liver disease will need some form of blood plasma in developing their treatment. So it's sort of like, if you want to produce bottled water, you need water and plastic at a minimum. Those are necessary ingredients in producing bottled water. And a lot of the treatments for these diseases, such as severe head traumas, burn and shock patients, clotting deficiencies, and severe liver disease, you need blood plasma as an input. And there's many more. Those are just a few. And what's striking is that I think it's Germany and the United States are the 2 biggies in the international space that allow people to sell blood plasma for money and are one of the biggest suppliers of blood plasma to countries that ban the sale of it, ironically enough. So the thought or the argument here would be that if you were to allow, if the different countries would allow blood plasma markets, you would either mitigate or erase that shortage. In fact, you might even have a surplus of blood plasma. And that would be a good thing. It would save many, many lives. Now, of course, I'm speaking in consequentialist terms there. You may have some deontological objections to markets in blood plasma. I'm not sure they'll succeed, though. You might think it's undignified to buy blood plasma from people, but it might also be undignified to prevent people from selling their plasma and preventing the deaths of others who need not die. So on the deontological side, it's a little contentious, and it's pretty solidly pro selling of blood plasma on the consequential side of things. Now, I've laid out why why people sort of reject it, or excuse me, what the stakes are, why blood plasma markets matter, what they would potentially solve, and the sorts of diseases they go to treat. Um, so I got objections because it seems like on a consequentialist point of view, it looks pretty solid. Deontology looks pretty solid too. Why not have markets in blood plasma? I understand the argument, to go back a few slides, for not selling children or stolen goods. Those make sense. There's some good consequentialist and deontological arguments against doing both of those things. And it turns out deontologists and consequentialists historically have agreed. Slavery, generally speaking, terrible, bad. Child trafficking, bad. Selling stolen goods, bad. You incentivize people to break in other people's homes, steal their cars, whatnot. Stealing their horses, we're talking back in the day. So why it's blood plasma regenerates, it would save plenty of lives. It looks like it do a lot of good in the world, and it doesn't look like there's very strong objections on either the consequentialist or the deontological side of things. So what is the big hubbub? Why do some people object to blood plasma markets? We're going to go over the four biggies, although there's lots of others, we don't really have time. And I want to focus on the sort of big ticket items, philosophically speaking. So objection number one, blood plasma markets corrupt buyers and sellers by causing defective preferences or character traits. So if you've ever seen the movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas and Charlie Sheen, this was back when he was young and not a cokehead. So this is, I think, I want to say mid to late 80s. Michael Douglas plays a Wall Street financier guy who speculates and whose favorite slogan is that greed is good. Gordon Gekko doesn't give a crap about you, other people, families, workers. He doesn't care. He's in it to make money and money alone. Money is, in a sense, his religion as a god. He says greed is good constantly. And you might wonder whether or not the fact that Gordon Gekko is such a capitalist, he's so much like, Scrooge McDuck, right? Diving in his own gold coins, right? Which I don't think you can do physically, but putting that aside, I just think, like, look, the reason we don't want blood plasma markets is because it treats people so transactionally. It treats aspects of them transactionally. It corrupts buyers and sellers. You bought it, so it's in the sense like there's a price tag associated with it. It'd be like paying for a wife or a husband or something, or a family member, like paying to have an aunt or an uncle. And maybe implicitly in your mind, there would always be a price tag attached to these individuals and your relationship with them. And this is not the way we want people interacting with each other. We do not want them interacting transactionally. This is not the optimal human situation. And initially, there's something to this argument. You might think, like, look, yeah, that's a thing. It's something that's, it's something that I get. I wouldn't want buyers and sellers to be corrupted by the fact that they're transacting cash, so to speak, for blood plasma. But there's a problem, which it seems like there's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of counterexamples. So we often buy and sell things all the time and still care about them. I mean, dogs and cats are a great example. There's a sense in which when you buy a puppy or a kitten, you are buying that animal. There's a sense in which you own it. Now, that doesn't mean you can do anything you want to it. And it also doesn't mean that you will do anything you want to it. Lots of people who have purchased a dog or a cat love their furry little friend very, very much. When I grew up, I had a little dog. His name was Mutt Mutt. And I've told the story before, but I was like 6 or 7, and Mutt Mutt got out of the backyard, and being a dumb dog, because dogs don't know any better, he got hit by a car and was suffering very severely. So there was a trade-off, or a decision that had to be made. My parents decided to put him down. It cost too much. We were very poor growing up, and we just didn't have the money of the surgery he would need. And the veterinarian told us there was a very good chance that even with the surgery, Mutt Mutt would die anyway. And if we didn't have the surgery, he would slowly die, but a very agonizing death. And it broke my little heart. Yeah, a little 6-year-old boy and a dog. He was my best buddy. And I knew he bought them. I remember picking them out. I remember how much it costs. And it broke my heart. It didn't seem to change the fact. My relationship with him didn't change because I knew he was a dog that we bought. Um, and this happens all the time. People pay for things all the time and still love them. So it's not clear why we would think that it would corrupt buyers and sellers when it comes to blood plasma, when it doesn't seem to corrupt buyers and sellers when it comes to pets. I mean, of course, some people occasionally abuse their pets, but by and large, people don't. They love their pets. And they go through grief. They're sad when they die or something happens to them. They care. They're invested in them. They have relationships with them. They matter. Not sure that objection works. Maybe I'm wrong. It's up to you to decide. Objection 2. This one you hear a lot. Blood plasma markets would exploit the poor and only help the rich. There's an exploitation charge. Exploitation is basically the practice of taking advantage of someone unjustly. So a classic example that I like to use is if on Halloween night I were to go around, so you probably can't tell from videos, but I'm a very large man. I'm about 6'4". If I went around to little kids and scared the crap out of them and then grabbed their bags of candy after they had gone house to house to house to collect the candy, I'm exploiting the children. I mean, not only is it just mean, obviously, it's exploitation in the sense that I am unfairly taking advantage of my size and the fact that children scare easily and they're likely to drop their candy and run, making it a lot easier for me to get candy without having to go door to door to get it. Now, obviously, that's a cartoonish example. I wouldn't do that, but it's supposed to illustrate what it is to exploit. So to take advantage of someone in a way that they object to. And I can see the initial appeal of this objection. There seems like there's something to it. The poor would be more likely to sell blood plasma than the rich. However, if the poor are selling blood plasma, presumably that's because that's their best option. So sort of like with sweatshop work, people are often very critical of sweatshops because they're not very fun to work in. And they don't look very fun to work in. I wouldn't want to work in one. But presumably these are folks who work in sweatshops are rational enough to make decisions for themselves. They can decide whether or not they want to work there. They're not coerced. And apparently many of them have decided that sweatshop work is the best option available to them, and they've decided to go for it. Now, in order to really make an exploitation charge stick, you really have to show that you've somehow unfairly harmed someone. And a good way to do that is whether or not they object to it or they're fine with it. So the decision to, if donating or if giving a blood plasma away for money or exploitation, we would expect the donors would object. But it turns out blood plasma markets actually pay fairly well. Partly that's because of the shortage. There's a shortage of blood plasma in the world. So it's about $50 to $100 per donation. And you can donate a couple times a week. Now, that's not going to go very far in a very rich country like the United States or Germany, but in poor countries like Poland or Vietnam or Cambodia, that might go quite a ways. And it might be a side hustle that means the difference between going hungry, paying the bills, providing for your children, and not. Now, on slide 6, which I'm on currently, there is a tweet here from the plasma professor, Peter Jaworski. This is the individual the philosopher that I interview for the podcast assigned for this week in lieu of a reading assignment. And he says, and this is sort of the point here that I'm trying to make, that it's not clear that this is exploitation. It doesn't look like exploitation at all. He says opponents of paying for plasma, quote, people who are paid for plasma are exploited. And then people who are paid for plasma, this is someone who posted tweeted this independently. I think plasma donation is my new hobby. Watch YouTube guilt-free for an hour and get paid. Sign me the F up. All right, pardon my French, but that's what it says. In other words, I don't feel like I'm being exploited. I get to watch YouTube for an hour. They take my blood plasma. It gets replenished. My body replenishes it. I get paid for it, and I help people. How great is that? You get paid to help people, save lives, and watch YouTube while you do it? I mean, come on. Now, that could be exploitation. I'm just not sure what's exploitative about it. I mean, it may not be your favorite thing in the world. It may not be very great, but I'm guessing the guy working on your roof or your plumbing, probably not very great either. The person who has to go to war or the person who has to drive a truck, or the person who has to, I don't know, like a live-in nanny. Not always great. Sometimes jobs suck, but that doesn't mean they're exploitation. Part of the problem here is if you say this is exploitation, then it's not clear what job isn't exploitation. And if you think all jobs are exploitation, I don't know what you mean by exploitation. That seems a little strong. So the point here is that it doesn't look like exploitation based on some of the reactions. That doesn't mean every single person likes the prospect of selling their blood plasma to pay the rent. No. But I'm betting the person who drives the city bus, you're going to find some of them that don't like that job either. So I'm not sure blood plasma markets actually exploit the poor. We're going to say a little more about that. People say this, but there's when you really look under the hood, so to speak, of that objection, it doesn't really look like that dog is going to hunt. It doesn't look persuasive. It looks shallow. Number 3. Let me move my little video to the window here. Objection 3. Oop. I can't count. 2, 3, 3. The wrong signal. Treating certain things as commodities sends a signal that they are merely commodities and fails to express the proper respect. So a signal would be something like, I don't know, you ask me for money on the street, let's suppose. I'm walking by, you're in a bad position. You ask me for money, and I take some money, water it up, and just throw it at you, like bounce it off your head. There's a sense in which I signaled contempt for you. I mean, I gave you money, but I was kind of a jerk about it. And I probably made you feel about, yay high, yay tall, very small, looked down upon. So the idea here is that it sends the wrong signals. It treats blood plasma and the people who provide it as commodities and nothing but mere commodities. Like that's all they are, is commodities. And once again, this objection has the sort of initial plausibility to it. There's something to what they're saying. It's not entirely crazy. It seems like, maybe we don't want to treat people as mere like blood plasma providers. The problem though is that something can be a commodity without being a mere commodity. For example, buying a kitten, a sense in which the kitten is a commodity, but it's not only a commodity. It can be a beloved family pet, a member of the family. And if you don't think people love their pets, go on YouTube and watch people loving on their pets, buying them ridiculous toys, introducing them to the family. People grieve when they die. They'll go to great lengths to ensure their health, to make sure they get great food. And also too, but that's part of the problem. One of the other parts of the problem, or one of the other issues with this objection, is that on the one hand, suppose you think, look, paying people for blood plasma sends the wrong signal about how we want to treat people. But on the other hand, if we don't pay people for blood plasma, lots of people will die who otherwise wouldn't have with the blood plasma. What do you think is worse? Is it really sending the wrong signal? Even if you think sending the wrong signal is bad, you might be in a situation such that it's one or the other. Like there's trade-offs any way you go. There's no solutions here. There's nothing where it's perfect without any downsides. You either send the wrong signal and have blood plasma and save lives, or you don't send the wrong signal and people die, lots of people die, who wouldn't otherwise for lack of blood plasma. So not only is it a mistake to say if something's treated as a commodity, it's treated as a mere commodity. That's not the same thing at all. Cats, in some sense, are commodities, but not mere commodities. They're also beloved family members. But even putting that aside, you can either have your signal intact and people dying for lack of blood plasma, or you can send the wrong signal and save people's lives. Now, I don't know about you, but I think consequences beat signals. Maybe there's an argument to be had here. That's what discussion posts are for. But it seems like that's maybe not that convincing of an objection, especially in lieu of all the people who will die as a result. We know they're dying because there are lots and lots of shortages. And to go back here a second, Peter Jaworski, the plasma professor, if you check out his Twitter account, just for fun, if this is interesting to you, and look at his research and some of the stuff he's worked on, he has a lot of great evidence backing this up. All right. So finally, objection number 4, the last one. You can't call it the crowding out objection. You get this one a lot. This is my favorite one. It's probably one of the most common objections to blood plasma markets. Markets make us more selfish and crowds out motivations or motives to do something good for its own sake. The question, though, is that true? So if you thought markets made us more selfish, maybe because we treat things transactionally, maybe because it makes things about profits and losses, and it crowds out genuine motives to do nice things for people for their own sakes. Like, you actually help people just to be nice. You're not doing it to get paid. You don't help the old lady into the grocery store, help her with her groceries because you're trying to get a tip. You're doing it to be nice. That'd be somewhat understandable. I'm not sure it defeats the impetus to donate, but even if you think it would, I'm not sure this applies. So markets make us more selfish and crowd us out our motives to do something good for its own sake sounds bad, but is it true? Well, it actually turns out it's exactly the opposite. Surprisingly, market economies tend to be one of the most trusting and generous of the economies. The United States being the most generous in terms of donations and what's known as third-party trust, social trust. So I trust you, you trust me. To give an example of this, it's kind of a quirky toy example, but it illustrates the point nicely. I don't think you expect to be mugged and killed and your money stolen when you walk into a Walmart. That's because Walmarts want to make money off of you. And if they killed people who walked through the front door, it wouldn't take long before word spread or people figured this out and people wouldn't shop at Walmart anymore. You can apply this to Costco or Best Buy or Starbucks or any place that you frequent, any establishment. Now, there's a reason. Now, it'd be an easy way to make money. You could club someone over the head, take their wallet, and be done with it, rather than go to all the bother of providing them with, customer service and that didn't help. Customer service and good products and services and yada yada yada. You could, pardon me here for a second. You can do all those things and make money, or you can clock someone over the head, take their money, and be done with it. It turns out, though, that markets really do a good job of training people to be more social and trusting. So it turns out the numerous studies show people in market economies tend to be more trusting of strangers, friendlier, and more generous. So that's part of the problem with this objection. Turns out people in market economies, the reason market economies work is trust. It's not that markets make us less trusting. It's that we're less trusting, which allows us to have markets. The explanation is exactly backwards, in fact. So that's problem number 1 with objection number 4. Now, what's problem number 2? We benefit from the profit motive all the time. When I walk into a Starbucks, which I talk about a lot because I have a slight coffee addiction, it's nice to be able to buy a coffee and leave, because I'd much rather have the coffee that I'm drinking than the money that I exchanged for the coffee. And Starbucks would much rather have my money than the coffee they're selling me. It turns out there's a beneficial exchange. And there's also all kinds of needs that I have. Sometimes I need a backpack or shoes or food or gas or bedding or a mattress or a TV, or there's all kinds of things that you need, right? Things that you use to live your life. The very clothes I'm wearing, the microphone I'm using, the computer I'm talking on. These were all things not made by me. These were things that I need. I have certain needs and wants. You want luxury stuff. You have necessities and goods that you want to buy. Toilet paper. Remember during the pandemic, the toilet paper craze, and people were buying off the shelves left and right. It was crazy time. But isn't it nice those products are available for purchase? If you had to make your own clothes, raise your own food, construct your own furniture, probably some people could, maybe a few, very small handful. But the vast majority of people in market economies would not be able to do those things, and not able to do them nearly as well or as efficiently or as cheaply as the people who do them and provide those goods and services in stores and on Amazon, places like that. Those things are great. They're benefits, and they allow you to buy things that you need and want. So that's the second problem with objection number 4. So the crowding out objection, even if there's something to it, doesn't seem to overcome the very strong consequentialist case for plasma markets. But maybe I'm wrong. In fact, it's something probably that you all should talk about in your discussion post.